Hello and welcome. My name is Theo, and tonight we'll be joined by a panel of experts to look at the local council elections here in Victoria. In a moment, I'll be speaking to John Masanauskas, the city editor from the Herald Sun, to give us his take on the City of Melbourne results. And we will also be joined by Labor endorsed candidate in Moreland, Lambros Tapinos, also the president of the Victorian Local Governance Association, long-term councillor from Moreland, and from Phillip Healey, who's a former councillor in Boroondara, who hasn't recontested these council elections, and he'll give us his take and input from Boroondara and across surrounding councils. Good evening to both of you gentlemen, and to John Masanauskas, who I'll be talking to in a few minutes. What a year it has been to have a campaign, a local council campaign. We've had stage 4 restrictions in Victoria. We've had obviously a very difficult time for a lot of Victorians, and we've had a recession in amongst all of this as well. Hopefully that is in the past. They say at the national level that we're out of the technical recession, but of course in Victoria, it's still a tough road ahead. The state government decided to proceed with the scheduled local council elections, and tonight we'll take a look at some of the results from counting so far in metropolitan Melbourne. Counting will continue this week, and for the latest results, you can always refer to the VEC's website. Now, this will be an interactive session, so please leave your comments in the comment section, and we'll hope to get to your questions as we go along. Now, when we talk about Victorian councils, there is none bigger than the City of Melbourne, and that has been a very competitive campaign this time around. Sally Capp succeeded Robert Doyle when he created a vacancy in May 2018. In 2020, she was challenged by no less than 5 other candidates. And there's no one that knows the City of Melbourne better than the Herald Sun's John Masanauskas, who's the city editor, and he joins us now. John, good evening.
Good evening, Theo.
Look, thank you so much for joining us, John. I know that you're currently on leave, so it's very generous of you. Can you just give us a bit of a background as to how these candidates were able to nominate in Melbourne? Was it something that was foreseen with people like Aaron Wood and others nominating? And how do you see this playing out over the next few weeks?
So in terms of Aaron, of course, Sally Capp won at the by-election, as you said, 2 years ago. So that wasn't a full, it was a Lord Mayoral by-election. There was no sort of deputy leadership ballot on that. So this is quite a different one. This is the full council, full leadership teams, you know, deputy and Lord Mayor candidates, and of course councillors. So it was the real thing, the full thing. Look, I think everybody was thinking whether Aaron Wood, who is the current Deputy Lord Mayor, and he was part of the old Doyle team, whether he would run. The same sort of thing happened before the by-election. There was some speculation he might run, but he decided not to, obviously, and remained as deputy. And of course, Sally won against Jennifer Yang at that last election. She was the Labor candidate for Chisholm at the last federal election. So look, this time Aaron sort of didn't nominate for quite a while, but in the end he did come. He did obviously announce his running, and there wasn't really a surprise. Everybody thought that he would. I think he felt that he had to have a go. It was either now or never. He really wanted to know what his support was. He clearly wasn't happy with Sally Capp over various issues, over Queen Victoria Market, over her plan for a green line, this sort of linear park through Melbourne based on New York's High Line. There were lots of issues that, you know, he wasn't happy with, so he thought he was, you know, justified to run. So he did. We also had, I guess, some surprises. We had nightclub owner and well-known Melburnian Nick Russian, who was also a late starter in some ways, but on a sort of a pseudo or on a bit of a liberal ticket. And obviously Phillip Liu is here on this panel. He can talk about that as well.
Yep. He'll be joining us very soon, yes.
And then we also had an endorsed Labor ticket, which we don't always have in the City of Melbourne. So that was the sort of first for a while. And then Jennifer Yang ran again. she's a Labor Party member, as I said. She had the backings of some left-wing unions. So she had a bit of money, I think, to do mail-outs and things. She ran a pretty spirited campaign, or at least her people did. So she was a factor again. And of course, we have the Greens, who are very strong in the inner city. There's no denying that. They're always perform well, which is a matter of how well they would perform. Then we had a socialist candidate who actually did quite well because they got a bit of the donkey vote, I think.
And who was that, John?
That was Kath Larkin.
Right.
Yeah. So look, they had a fairly, didn't get a huge run in the media, but they attended the various forums and everything. So they were in the mix. Gary Morgan ran again for the sixth time.
Is that the sixth time? Is it? Is he going for a record or?
I don't know. I think he just loves it. He loves it. Yeah.
And just going back to Jennifer Yang, John, last time you said that she was the second candidate. I think it was about a 4% margin that Sally Cap was elected on two candidate preferred. Where did Jennifer Yang end up this time around?
Well, this time I'm on the sort of haven't seen the leadership figures. We think around 9%.
Right. Okay.
Which is not a bad result. Which is all similar to the endorsed Labor ticket, which was headed by Phil Reid, who works for Slater and Gordon. Yeah. Right.
And so Aaron Wood, I'm assuming, has been, if he doesn't get elected as mayor, he'll be the runner-up, so to speak. What are the latest results? Do you have anything that you've heard from the last few hours?
There's nothing's come from the leadership team recently. So I'm sort of going on figures which are fairly old, but I don't think they're going to change a lot.
Right.
Basically, Cap seems to have about a third of the vote.
Right.
Wood has around 17%. It could go a bit lower. And then you have the Greens on about 15. And as I said, Yang on around 9. Also, the Labor ticket around 9. Nick Russian's team was around 10 or similar sort of level, around that level. So he performed very well, I think.
So is it safe to say that if we look at Phil Reid's preferences and we look at Sally Cap's primary vote and we add them together, is that going to be her best path to victory, would you say?
Well, we're sort of going into expert territory here, which it's not as simple as speaking to some of these sort of nerds, I call them, who are behind the scenes looking at these results and screwed in ears. It's quite a complicated thing, but obviously, so Labor did preference Cap ahead of Wood. I've heard though that it could end up being a Cap Yang or a Cap Wood two-party. But it seems that Cap's won.
Yeah. So if Cap is elected mayor and her team get at least 2 other councillors in addition to herself, how do you see the dynamics on council over the next 4 years? Will she have a renewed authority, or will it be somewhat a bit different?
Well, I've heard some talk today that she may get 3 councillors.
Right.
So she'd have 5 out of 11, which is a pretty good effort if that happens.
So the deputy plus the 3, right?
Yeah. And they are, I don't know if you want to know, but Kevin Louis, who's a sitting councillor, Rashina Campbell, who's a lawyer, and Mark McMillan, who's an RMIT law professor, and I believe he's Indigenous. So if he got up, he'd be the first Indigenous City of Melbourne councillor who actually would take his seat. We did have one who won last time and couldn't take her seat up. So look, I think so. You'd have 5 out of 11. You'd also have a Labor candidate, Labor David Griffiths, who'll be elected on the Labor ticket.
Yep.
So look, one of the sort of conspiracy theories was that Nick Rees, who is the deputy candidate for Sally Cap, who is a Labor Party figure, that he'd sort of engineered a deal with the Labor ticket, sort of to exchange preferences, and then get himself and Sally elected, and then have a Labor, a couple of Labor candidates as well who'd get elected, and then they would sort of form a block. Right. That's all, of course, all denied, but that seems to be working out for them in some ways. Yeah. So that with him, they'd have 6. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, look, I guess there's 2 steps. We have to see what happens with the final results, and then we will find out eventually. It always comes out. And look, John, I really appreciate your analysis, your input. We'll be following your coverage in the Herald Sun over the next few weeks when we get final results. And I guess at this point, I'll bid you farewell. Thank you so much, John, and we'll stay in touch.
Thanks, Theo.
John
All the best.
Masanauskas, thank you from the Herald Sun. Now we might return to our panel, and I'll welcome back Phillip Healey, who is the former councillor in Boroondara, mayor actually as well, long-term councillor, retiring after a very long period in office, and Lambros Tapinos, who I did say earlier was joining us from Moreland, and he is the current president of the Victorian Local Governance Association, as well as being one of the outgoing councillors in Moreland. Now, Phillip and Lambros, I take it that you were listening into John Masanauskas talking about the Melbourne Council results. Do you have anything that you wanted to add before we get to our first guest who's joining us from Melbourne Council, and that will be Phillip Liu?
I'm just keen to hear from Phillip's perspective, I think, Theo. Yep.
Absolutely. Well, that's something that we'll get to right away. And Phillip Liu has been a councillor on Melbourne for the last term, and he's obviously running for re-election. And he's someone who has worked very, very hard, I know from personal experience, and he joins us now. Phillip Liu, good evening.
Thanks, Theo, for the invite.
It's a pleasure to have you. We appreciate your time. So John Masanauskas was talking more about the mayoral election results. Can you give us maybe where are we at with your seat and your other council positions on Melbourne Council there?
Look, there's nothing is definite at the moment. I think so. It's more we're going to get the result probably Wednesday. That's going to be the declaration of result. But look, I think what I'll just add to from what John had said, because I'm quite keen here about, I guess, the other outside of Melbourne as well. But it's that, look, it's, there's probably going to be, half of the council replaced. So only half of the people will be most likely to get back in. So, then, and again, that just shows that people, in this climate, there is, you could say that the people are kind of mindful of change, but at the same time, they do want continuity, especially at the leadership level.
And who are those candidates that might not be re-elected?
One that's we have a lot of retiring ones.
Right. Okay.
But most, look, I don't want to. We won't know the result until until Wednesday, and I don't want to. But I'm guessing half of it will be replaced, and half of it will stay, will get re-elected.
Yeah.
But look, I think that the key things, is during this uncertain time, people vote more towards their political party or what they know, and we've seen that very clearly demonstrated where now more and less it's less independents and less non-people who are not connected to a party, because I think pretty much we're going to get a whole council full of party-aligned people. So
Phillip, what was, if you had to say the biggest issue in your campaign, what would you say it was?
Biggest issue for me probably was the bias media coverage in some ways. So look, to be brutally honest, and this is just speaking from my own side, is we had to resort to all different type of strategies and everything. And for me, for example, the Age didn't even cover us until probably the second last day of the election. It didn't give us any good run and everything. So I always think that, has kind of, we should be all fair. So that was one of the key things that we had to work with. Another one, I'm sure Phillip and Andrew and Lambros and everyone would know, is the Australia Post was very slow in terms of the delivery, and that's something that I'm really pushing once, if I am re-elected or anything, to have a new way of voting. Because relying on Australia Post is it's especially when you have an election like this during this time, and relying on that service, I think that is just we're in the 21st century. I mean, we should be better than this.
So what's the best solution in your mind?
I've seen some pretty innovative strategies or also solutions to come around. And I think, look, we'll need to go to, I personally think the fact that we can't actually get out, again, reinforces the exploring digital voting, and also just ensuring that if we are able to get that, because at the end of the day, it's all about democracy, right? We want to get 100% people to vote, because that's the best representation of, people's voice. So I think that we need to look at different, I'm not an expert on it, and I don't want to be saying what is the exact solution, but I would say we, given that we are in this, fourth industrial revolution and startups are popping up left, right and center, I'm sure I've seen a couple of startups that really has some innovative solutions to voting that I think we should really explore.
Yeah. And just final question, Philip, and we really appreciate your time. Looking over the next 4 years now, if you are re-elected, and if Sally Capp is re-elected as mayor, and if John Masanauskas from the Herald Sun is correct that there will be 5 Sally Capp team councillors, plus obviously, and I don't know whether that's correct or not, but let's assume that that happens. What would be the first thing that you would want to be working on with those group of councillors as we sort of hopefully get out of this recession that we're currently in Victoria?
Yeah, and that's look. The first and foremost is kind of how we support our business, but also provide how we make it that give people the confidence to get back into the city. Business needs it's a kind of a flow-on effect. Once you get the business up, build the confidence level, then everything else will come into play. So I think that's going to be the key thing that will be coming out. I think there are a lot of other issues. For example, I think mental health is going to be a big one, because, and it's not just about the residents, but also the mental health of business owners, because there is that fear that potentially there's going to be a third wave, right? Yeah. So there, all the owners I've spoken to, they'll say, I'm happy to open up, but the third wave, I just can't keep thinking about when that will come. Hopefully not, but I've got to prepare for it. So we need to just. Those are the key issues.
Well, Philip, we hope that we can meet again after we know results, and we wish you all the very best. Thank you so much for your time. That was Phillip Liu from the City of Melbourne, running again for a second term. Thank you so much. I'll return now to our panel, Philip Healey and Lambros Tapinos. Now, we obviously have spent some time talking about the City of Melbourne, gentlemen. And at this point now, I'd like to maybe turn our attention to the rest of Melbourne, the metropolitan councils, like here in Monash and like you in Moreland. And Philip, you spent a very long time in Boroondara. If we could maybe start with Lambros, Tapinos, do we have results yet from Moreland? And if so, where are they trending?
Firstly, thanks for having us on the program, Theo. And no, we don't have results. However, we do have some samples from scrutineers, and we do have a portion of first primary votes for some wards. So it is taking a little bit of time for the VEC to complete this process. And of course, it's all changed with COVID-safe plans, and they haven't been able to undertake the process as quickly as they would have done otherwise. So we must be still patient. But nonetheless, we do have some primary votes that are starting to come in. And for those wards that we don't, we have samples from scrutineers. So Moreland is quite an interesting council. Of course, over the last 4 years, the biggest block at Moreland City Council has been the Greens. So there was a bit of a green slide in 2016, with, of course, the now leader of the Victorian Greens, Samantha Ratnam, leading the showdown in Moreland and really dragging her team to a majority at Moreland. Of course, they have implemented some policies that have been quite controversial in the community, particularly around waste, and that is decreasing the waste and recycling service, and also quite a radical car parking plan. So there's been plenty of issues that really got the voters interested in local council. And the first impression is that there is a higher turnout than normal. Of course, it is the first time Moreland is going to a postal vote. Normally it's got an attendance. So there's a lot of people interested to see how that is going to change the results. And of course, we know that it would probably mean that more non-resident ratepayers, so people who own property and pay rates but don't live in Moreland, are probably voting in this election. And the first results are showing a strong flow towards independent candidates at the expense of Labor, the Greens, and also Socialist candidates. So we're seeing a strong preference for independent candidates in the northern wards. However, in the southern ward where I am, we're seeing a Labor vote that is, and a Green vote that is still quite strong. And I think that is reflective of the different communities and the demographic changes. And also we are seeing a lot of late votes, which haven't been counted yet, that are coming in today and tomorrow, that are just being opened up by the VEC, and they're showing different results once more. So people who are voting late tend to go more Greens in the experience that I'm seeing at Moreland. So it's a very different, so the samples are very different. So I guess we just got to wait until it's all counted on Wednesday.
And is there anyone, Lambros, that you know for certain has been either elected or re-elected in Moreland so far?
Yeah, so in Moreland, we've got a lot of incumbents have not sought re-election, but it's very clear that the incumbents have done well. So Oscar Yildiz in the Northwest Ward is leading the pack with about 37 or 38% of the vote. And that is
What's that?
37 to 38% of the vote for Oscar Yildiz.
No, that's not possible.
A phenomenal result.
That is not possible. Are you being serious?
Look, that's what the sample is showing. And look,
I'm going to ask for a recount.
And this is the candidate.
No, that's phenomenal. That is very good.
It is. It's almost 2 quotas in his own right. And this is a candidate that ran in the previous state election in the local seat of Pascoe Vale. So certainly someone who has a tremendous profile locally. And Councillor Anna Olivia Carley-Hannon is going to be successful for the Labor Party in the North East Ward. And in the South Ward, both the Greens lead candidate Mark Riley and myself own strong positions. And the other spots are up in the air, I must say, but there would be more independents elected at Moreland City Council. That's the conclusion that I'm reaching. And all of the incumbents are probably getting re-elected or doing quite well.
I assume that the Greens' preferences are going strongly to the Labor endorsed candidates. Is that right?
No, there's a lot of progressive independents that the Greens are flowing to, and socialist groups, and the Reason Party as well, which is participating for the first time. So they're all working together, or preferences, voters are at least identifying progressive candidates and votes are being shared there. So it's very much a case of Labor versus the Greens in Moreland. So they're the 2 major blocks. And it's going to be a very close result to see who gets the majority. I don't think anyone will. I think it would be independents in the middle that form a majority in Moreland. And I'm seeing similar results right across the north and the west. A bit of a swing to independents right across in the north and west of Melbourne.
Lambros, before I get to Phillip Healey, can I just ask you another question just regarding the Labor Party's campaign in Moreland and in other councils? It's correct to say that the Labor Party has endorsed candidates in Moreland, such as yourself. What impact with campaigning does that have? I'm guessing it's a net advantage when you look at resources. Politically, with the results that you've seen in the samples, would you say that you've done, not you personally, but the team has done better than last time, or is it basically the same, or is it maybe a little bit?
It's basically the same. There may be a marginally better result this time round. I'm not sure whether we put that down to endorsements or resources. Certainly access to data does help. But look, I think at the end of the day, the results are fairly similar. Now, the Labor Party may increase a councillor or 2, but they were very unlucky in 2016, where they just missed out in all 3 wards. So they ended up with 3 in 2016, and it's probably looking like 3 again, maybe 4 at best. And that's also reflective in Moonee Valley and also Darebin as well. So in Darebin Council, of course, it's quite interesting for me, being from Moreland, because they're very similar municipalities.
Yep.
But they have single member wards for the first time. Well, for the first time in many years, that is. So what I'm seeing there is a strong vote of confidence for incumbent councillors. So single member wards, my conclusion thus far is that incumbent councillors tend to do well. So you have many of the incumbents who were contesting, Julie Williams, Tim Lawrence, Gaetano Greco, Susan Rennie, being re-elected or very, very close to being re-elected. There were a couple of interesting wards down in the south that were Labor Green battles. And certainly Emily Dimitriadis, a new Labor candidate, has done a tremendous result and looking very good in the southeast ward. And the Greens are likely to win the Central South ward, and that's probably going to give them a majority. So I'm tipping a Green majority in Darebin, with the Labor Party increasing slightly, but just not getting enough to form a majority, and the Greens will keep control of Darebin Council.
Lambros, that's an amazing analysis. Thank you so much. We'll give you a bit of a break.
Could I ask a few questions of Lambros before we...
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely, Philip. Is that fine with you, Lambros? I assume it is.
Oh, not a problem.
Just, I was driving over to Preston this morning, and I noticed Lena Messina is now an independent, and I've seen some Greens take their shirt off for the election and calling themselves an independent, which wouldn't be tolerated by them for other party groups. Are you seeing a predominance of people becoming convenient independents over your side of town?
I believe Lena has always been an independent, but
Really?
has worked closely with the Greens
Okay.
on the council.
I stand corrected then.
Yeah, and Philip, it's interesting you mentioned Lena Messina, because that is one of the wards that is still too close to call, and it looks like the Greens may have actually defeated her. So Esther Kennedy might be picking up that spot for the Greens ahead of Lena Messina. So you have friends and allies on the council, but certainly politics is a very different thing, and it looks like the Greens may have actually defeated Lena in that ward, but still too close to call.
It seems she's had a very rough campaign by what I could pick up off the web. The other question I have is about, do you think this election you're seeing a predominance of female candidates getting up, and will the mix change over that side of the Eira?
Yeah, look, the gender diversity is actually quite good and quite balanced on the north side of the Eira, and we're seeing that hold up. Of course, there was a huge increase of female candidates nominating, and that was really pleasing to see. And there's been a lot of work by the VLGA and others in this field. So we had a lot of nominees, and a lot of them are getting successful. So we're seeing a great result for female participation, both in Hume, in Moreland, in Moonee Valley, and in Darebin, and right across the north and west of Melbourne. So that's a great outcome, and it goes to the credit of the VLGA and many others who are doing a lot of great work in this field.
And were your number of candidates up on the last election?
There were, yes, significant numbers. So in my ward, for example, I think I've contested a few elections. I've had somewhere between 7 and 11 candidates in the past, 11 being the maximum. And this year I had 15 candidates, and they were 15 people. I believe 13 of the 15 ran really strong campaigns, put out material, strong social media presence, and have taken a share of the votes. So you're seeing my primary vote, for example, may seem quite low, and so may be Mark Riley's from the lead candidate of the Greens. And that's because we're sharing a primary vote with 15 other candidates, and everyone's polled 3 or 4%. So I'm seeing more participation and right across the board, greater diversity. So from a democratic perspective, I think it's been a big win, despite the fact of the COVID challenges and the COVID environment.
Yep, agreed.
Can I just, before we get back to you, Philip, to talk about the other side of town, Lambros, just one other question that I picked up there with, is it Lena or Lisa Messina? I apologise, I don't know her.
I believe it's Lena Messina.
Lena, okay.
Yeah.
So is it possible that she was a member of the Greens but not an endorsed candidate? Is that possible, or she was never a member of the Greens, if that's possible?
Look, Theo,
Yeah,
I don't know.
okay.
I've always known her to be an independent,
Yep.
but one that certainly works very closely with the Greens at Victorian Council.
Okay.
And you know, if it's okay, if we have a couple of minutes, I'll also just say that Hume is looking once more to be controlled by the Labor Party, but a significant increase in Liberal candidates. So more Liberal candidates getting elected in Hume is a possibility, but Labor maintaining control. And Moonee Valley is quite interesting as well. Incumbents are doing well, and the Labor Party is likely to increase its representation, but fall just short. Incumbents have done well across in Brimbank and Wyndham, and of course in Maribyrnong and Hobson's Bay. So we're not seeing much change there. But that's a bit of a wrap about the north and the west of Melbourne. So over to you.
Well, that's fantastic. Again, Lambros, you've obviously done a bit of research and spoken to a few of your fellow Labor Party members. Really appreciate that. Lambros, if you can maybe stand by for maybe a broader discussion soon, but we'll go back to Phillip Healey in, it looks as though you're in queue there, Phillip, in Boroondara.
I am.
Thank you so much for joining us from the outset, Phillip. Now, can we start with looking at any candidate in Boroondara who has definitely been elected out of the, is it 7 or 8 seats that are up in play there?
11.
11,
So we had a electoral review and we moved from 10 single member wards to 11.
Yep.
And there are 2 people who now, as a result of the Group A and Group B votes, are sitting with a majority. And that's Lisa Hollingsworth and Di Gillies. This will be Di's first term, and it's Lisa's second term. So congratulations to both of them, because they've got there on primary votes. The other 9 contests are all very much contests, and it's unusual in Boroondara for us to have so many wards that will actually go to preferences. We usually elect quite healthily on primary vote. And that's also when I was asking Lambros about the increased participation on his side. Certainly we're seeing that with not quite double, but probably at least 70 or 80% more than we would normally have. You know, a group of 5 is a big number in Boroondara for an election, but we've got 6s and 7s and plenty of them, and even 1-8. We're looking at, because we had 3 councillors retire, of which I'm one, Coral Ross and Jack Wegman have retired with a new ward. We're always going to have 4 new councillors at this election. There are 7 tight contests left in play, and I think a majority of those councillors will be returned based on the way that the numbers are looking tonight at the end of the Group B count. However, the preferences this time are very different to anything that we've experienced before, because there are no preferences listed on the candidate statements, and preferences are fairly wild and fluid at the moment. And of course, your scrutineers can't tell you much about sampling because due to COVID restrictions, we've got one scrutineer per candidate, and they've got to be at least 1.5 metres away from the scrutineer, and they're probably looking upside down and back to front. And opera glasses don't really work that well on those sorts of scenarios. So I think it's very hard for us to predict on what will happen with those preference allocations. And there's a couple of very tight contests in the new wards, or sorry, in the new where the people have retired. So it's going to be a very tight result, and not something that anyone's willing to predict on at least 4 of the wards tonight. So
yeah, look, Phillip, and congratulations to you over your very long service to Boroondara and the broader community. As someone that knows how hard it is for people to do the job in addition to all the other stuff that you do in your life, it's great. And to all the others, Jack Wegman, and I apologise, Coral Ross, and the 4th person is the retiring.
No, 3. There's 3 retiring.
My apologies. Yep.
Yeah,
okay.
But we're always guaranteed 4 new ones because of the new ward.
Of course. Okay. Yep. Now, just getting back to scrutineering. So I've heard this anecdotally as well from at least 2 separate council areas, and that's we've been told we can't dispute a ballot if we think it's formal or informal, because we're not allowed to step within the distance to actually see it properly. Now, I don't know whether that's true or not because I haven't done it myself, but have you heard that too? And if so, what does that sort of do to the overall sort of, I guess, environment that we're in with counting votes, in your view?
I'm talking to candidates all over the state, and what I'm hearing is a total lack of consistency in the way that scrutineering and counting has been set up. So I heard today there's one place that has a horseshoe table so that the scrutineers can stand in the middle and then look around. The counters are on the outside of the horseshoe. There are other places where you can have 2 scrutineers per candidate, and others where, of course, you can only have 1, but you might have 8 or 9 counters. So for those people who are quite used to the election process, imagine this at a state or federal level. It just would not be tolerated. And it was always going to be a problem.
Well,
so then there's the different applications and rules. And this goes right back to nominations where some councillors wanted to, or some candidates wanted to put in that in their 300 words that they were a Liberal Party member or a Labor Party member, or a Greens Party member, and the inconsistencies between the returning officers was huge.
Yeah.
Some got it, some didn't get it. So the inconsistencies in campaign and then nominations and then in counting, the only consistent thing about the whole thing is the inconsistency, I'm afraid. So, imagine trying to campaign and then it was 2 weeks before nominations, we found out that we'd be able to put signs up and do a letterbox drop. But then you're only allowed 2 hours a day and within 5 kilometres from your home to actually go and do letterbox dropping.
Yeah.
Now, imagine if you're a country councillor.
In your view, should the election have been postponed, or what would be the alternative?
I think in the situation we find ourselves, it should have been postponed. Yeah. I don't think it has been a very fair and democratic election in the way that things have turned out.
For the record, I completely agree, and I've been saying that all year. However, once the government decides to proceed, then there's no turning back from there. You cross the Rubicon, and you need to have an election, and you can't really, argue about possible smaller issues in my mind than the overall election across 79 or 80 councils, whatever it is. But look, we're running somewhat out of time, Philip, and I want to get to one of our second or our next guests, another candidate from.
If I could just answer one question.
Yes.
We should be electronic. Electronic is not new. We're a modern country. There are plenty of solutions out there. We don't have to go and make one. We can buy one. And please.
Yes.
To Andrew.
Okay,
yes.
Thank you very much, Philip. And certainly I'm sure that the debate will continue as to electronic voting, not only at council elections, but of course at the other levels of government. Now, our next guest is a candidate, former councillor and former mayor up at Whitehorse, running for re-election in a new single-member electorate, so to speak. Whitehorse went from multi-member wards to single-member wards, and it's very great to see Andrew Davenport joining us. Good evening, Andrew.
Good evening, Theo.
Well, if I could start with the obvious, how are you travelling with your own results in your re-election bid?
So currently the VEC count the votes into what they call Group A and Group B votes. Group A being all of the ballots that are received prior to the 23rd, and Group B, everything past that date up to the 30th. Whitehorse Council, the VC has counted all the votes for Group A. In my particular ward, I'm tracking just over 51% of the primary vote. So I'm reasonably confident of getting re-elected to council, but I'm waiting for the Group B results, which should be on Wednesday.
Well, that's very promising. So well done on that update so far, and we hope that it obviously continues. In regards to some of the other wards in Whitehorse, Andrew, are there any other candidates that have received either 50% or just about, that makes it very hard for them not to get elected?
Yeah, so there's a number of other incumbents that have received just over 50%. There would be two that, in addition to myself, that's received over 50% of the primary vote with Group A, and two more that are between 40 and 50. 9 councillors, incumbent councillors, sought re-election out of the 10. At this stage, it's looking like 7 out of those 9 will get re-elected, maybe 6. But it depends on a Group B. There are a number of contests where incumbents are facing a tough battle base, and we'll go to preferences on each one of those. I have seen that there has been strong votes for the incumbents generally within Whitehorse.
And did you have any concerns going into the election about the single member system? Any strong opinion either way? And what was the main sort of impact of having a smaller ward to contest, Andrew?
Yeah, so when the state government was making a decision, my view was that a multi-member ward structure would have been better to keep within Whitehorse, because you do get a more divergent representation on council. A single member ward structure was more of a winner takes all, and I know that there's a number of arguments plus and minus. My lobbying to the state members of parliament was make a decision early enough so everyone gets a good run up at the new system, and they did give us enough run up, in my view, for this election. I know that Phillip and others have already spoken about the impacts of COVID-19. I think that has certainly impacted people's ability to campaign, and certainly has given the incumbents an advantage that the others that have not had that power of incumbency had they were diminished in their ability in getting elected, I think.
Would you say COVID was the biggest issue?
I think that the ability to campaign was impacted by COVID, especially those means that are not by written letter or letterboxing, like the face-to-face. That was certainly impacted by COVID-19. And the fact that the local newspapers no longer exists anymore. As a candidate, I was getting calls saying, well, what happened to my old multi-member ward, and how come no one told us? And there was a bit of backlash there, but that's also reduces the ability for people to communicate. It's a lot harder to take out an ad or get a good run in the press with letters to the editor when the local newspaper doesn't exist in the same format anymore.
Yep. Well, look, from my perspective, I would agree with everything that you've said in the last few weeks from what I've seen down here in Monash. So just to reiterate, you're looking very good yourself. Most of your incumbent colleagues will be re-elected in Whitehorse. What would you say is the closest race so far from what you've seen in Whitehorse? Is there anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, I think there's a ward, Marnie's ward would be very close, because there's 5 candidates and no one is clearly in front. There's a couple of percentage points in it. The other ward is Box Hill and Park Box Hill South, where there's 9 candidates running, and it has a spread of votes and a spread of different support. I think that will go to a preference vote as well. So that will be very interesting to see how that lands as well.
Who are the top 2 candidates there, Andrew?
In Sparks ward, at the end of Group A voting, it's Peter Chandler and then the incumbent Tina Liu.
Right.
Yeah, and then after that, those two, there's a bit of a gap, and then a number of people with a very similar share of the vote.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see how that lands.
Well, look, Andrew Davenport, I really appreciate you joining us, and I wish you all the very best. Obviously, we know each other quite well, and I think you know you definitely deserve the results that you're getting from what I've seen. And so we hope that we can see you again after the declarations in a few weeks. All the best, Andrew Davenport.
Thank you. See you later. Bye.
Thanks a lot. Now, we have been joined by another long-term councillor in another council, and that's in Glen Eira, where we have Jamie Hyams, who's joined us to talk about all things Glen Eira. Jamie, first of all, congratulations on your term over a very long period in Glen Eira, including, I think, 3 or 4 terms as mayor and, of course, as deputy as well at certain other times. And it's great to see you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Theo. Thanks for having me along.
So I was hoping maybe, Jamie, you can have a chat to us about how you've seen some of the results falling in Glen Eira. Maybe, if possible, we can start with looking at any incumbents who are looking in strong positions.
Yeah, so we've still got the 3 ward system, 3 councillors, 3 wards, so 3 councillors in each ward, 9 altogether. Of the last council, only 4 of the 9 incumbents ran again. And at this stage, 3 of them are certainties and 1 of them looks very likely. So in the 3 wards, we had Tucker Ward, which is my old ward. We had Anne-Marie Cade, who had only been in council for a bit less than 2 years because she got in on a recount after Nina Taylor got elected to state parliament. And she's looking like coming first. She's certainly got the highest primary vote. Our primary votes are finished now. We're having the button pushed first thing on Wednesday morning in 3 wards. So Anne-Marie's coming first on the primary vote. She's also got good preferences directed to her, so she's a near certainty. Jim McGee, who's been there for 12 years, is running second in Tucker Ward. He's not absolutely certain, but he should get in, depending on what happens below him, because he and his 2 Labor colleagues have got a sort of a triangular preference flow. And at the moment, the person preferencing to him is coming third of the 3, but that may change after preferences are distributed. Jim actually, for reasons best known to himself, chose not to do any letterboxing during the current campaign and only had a couple of posters up, but relied on having sports clubs send out emails to their members and has been working social media very hard for the last 4 years, and he's still got the 2nd highest primary vote. So that shows.
That is amazing. Yeah. No letterboxing. That's amazing.
No, so that shows the benefit of incumbency, but I wouldn't recommend it.
No.
And third in Tucker Ward is an interesting one because it really depends on the preferences. So Jim's 2 running mates, Li Jiang and Declan Martin, who have both at various times worked for Labor MPs. Li Jiang's got the higher primary vote, but Declan might have better preferences coming to him, depending on who drops out further down the count. There's also a couple of independents called Christine Santos and Neil Brewster, who are partners, but because they have different surnames, but none of the voters knew that. And they've obviously cross-preferenced as well. And it looks like Christine is going to beat Neil, and more of his preferences might flow to Declan as well as flowing to Christina. But the fact that she's got his preferences, even though she's quite low on the primary vote, give her a chance. So in Tucker Ward, out of the 10 candidates, I think 2 of them are looking pretty good. 2 of them definitely won't get elected. And I wouldn't definitively rule out any of the other 6 for those last 2 spots. So even though we know all the primary votes, so Tucker's very interesting. Rosstown is a lot less interesting.
Right.
The 2 incumbents, Margaret Esikoff, who's been there since 2003 and has had currently in her 4th term as mayor, is close to quota. She got 22%, so she's a shoo-in. Tony Athanasopoulos, who was mayor once as a Labor Party member, is coming 3rd on the primary vote, and Sue Pennicue, who's the Greens candidate, who's a former member of the state parliament for the Greens in the upper house, is coming 2nd on the primary vote. And those 2 are a long way ahead of anyone else. So they're pretty much certainties.
So do you have numbers for Sue Pennicue? What is she, below 20% or over 20%?
Yeah, she's below 20%. But
right.
So what we've got is, I have the figures here in front of me. So Margaret's on 22%, Sue's on 15.7, Tony's on 15, and the next best is Neil Pilling, who's a former Greens member and a former mayor, who's on 8.4%.
So I haven't looked at these numbers. You don't think that Neil can catch Tony or either Sue based on 15%? It's still almost 10% below quota. You think that it's rock solid that she's going to get enough to sort of get there before anyone else?
Well, Neil's a faint chance. Tony's got reasonably good preferences coming to him. Sue doesn't. So Neil's a faint chance. But I think, when you're looking at 8.4% as against 15%, so Neil's got to make up almost 2,000 votes on her.
Yeah.
And, there is a lot of leakage of preferences.
Yeah.
So I think she'll be right. I think enough preferences will leak to her to keep her above him.
And I definitely will take your analysis over mine. But the reason I asked the question is because in Oakley, we've got a similar situation where one of the candidates has 14%, another has 16%. And I can definitely see the candidates beneath them sitting on, say, 8, 9, and 10, catching them early and then overtaking them. I can see it happening. I don't think it's likely, but I don't think it's, that the difference between likely and unlikely is not too big in my view. So we'll see what happens. It's as Philip said earlier, it's so hard to predict. It's so hard.
Yeah, look, I wouldn't fully rule it out, but there's 13 candidates altogether. And as we know, each time someone drops out, every other candidate gets a certain number of their votes, regardless of where they're put in the preference flow. So given that, and given how far behind Neil is from Sue, and Tony, I just can't see making up the ground.
Well, look, thank you so much for that Glen Eira update there. We're looking at...
There's one more ward, Camden Ward.
Oh, sorry about that. Please proceed.
Yes, so all the incumbents in Camden Ward aren't running again for various reasons. So there's an interesting count going on there. The Greens are coming second. Labor, the most interesting thing from my perspective is Labor had a candidate who had quite a nice brochure. He had an endorsement from Josh Burns, who's the local federal member for that ward. He had an endorsement from Mary Delahunty, the councillor, not the former state member, who polled above quota in the last election.
Yep.
And he is going to struggle to get his deposit back. He's on 3.986% of the vote.
Who's that? What's his name?
So his name's Ricky Steckhold.
Right, okay.
So what that suggests to me is that despite what the age might say about how the ALP is tracking in Victoria, certainly in Camden Ward, they're not tracking as well as the age would make out.
Yeah, look...
Other ALP-aligned candidate who also did very badly. And so what they're going to do, the Greens candidate came second, and what they will do is push up the Greens candidate because their votes will go to him and he'll probably get elected. There's a independent called Sam Parasol who's on 20% of the vote, who's also got reasonable preferences coming. And the battle for the third spot is between two others, Alan Grospart, who's a member of the Liberal Party and was on council up to 2005.
Yep.
And making a long-awaited comeback, I guess, and an independent called Simon's Mood.
Yep.
Alan's a bit ahead of Simon, but Simon's got preferences directed to her from two candidates who have done reasonably well. So I expect those preferences to push Simon above Alan. And I think we're looking at Sam, David Zingia, the Greens candidate, and Simon. So what Glen Eira will look like at the end of it will be two Greens members, two members of the ALP, at least, probably three, and four Liberal-leaning independents, but who aren't members of the party. Or when I say Liberal-leaning, so from centre to Liberal-leaning. A couple of them wouldn't probably lean either way.
So the candidate whose name escapes me, who's hovering on 4%, with the references from Mary Delahunty and from Josh Burns, he's not an endorsed Labor candidate, but he's the next best thing. Is that what the situation is?
Yeah, we don't. Labor has never endorsed candidates in Glen Eira.
Yeah.
I probably say it as disadvantageous, but certainly if you've got a endorsement from your local Labor federal member,
yes,
and the former councillor who's known to be a Labor member and is now running on the Labor ticket for the City of Melbourne, then I think he would have been identified as a Labor member, and I suspect he would have done better, as it turns out, without those endorsements.
Well, that's very, very interesting. I guess I will ask you maybe, do you have any insight about either Bayside or maybe even Stonington, Jamie Hyams?
Yeah, look, I can tell you a bit about both of those, a little anyway.
Yep.
Certainly in relation to Bayside, what I can tell you is they have gone from a multi-ward system to a single ward system, a single councillor system. And despite that, in some of their wards, they've had more people running than we have in our 3 councillor wards. So there's obviously seemingly a bit of a stack on there. And that's one of the disadvantages of the single ward system, is that the stack can really rule out a good candidate. But I don't know how that's panning out. But I do have some early figures for the 3 wards in Stonington. Stonington stuck with the 3 ward, 3 councillor system. So in North Ward, what we have is Matthew Coates and Marsha Griffin, who are incumbent councillors who are leading the primary vote. They're on 2,800 and 2,100 votes, respectively. And then there's a third candidate called called Kate Healey, and another one called Sarah Barton, who are quite close. I don't know how the preferences are flowing there. In East Ward, they've got a candidate called Benny Hill, who got the donkey vote, but still isn't doing all that well. But the current councillor, Jamie Klasaris, is leading the poll. She's a Labor member. And Alexander Liu, who ran as a Liberal. And Jamie's on 3,300, Alex is on 3,100. And the next best is the Green candidate, Holly Morgan, who's on 1,900. So that's out of 18,000. So no one's really that close to quota there. But you'd expect with that advantage, Jamie and Alex would be right, and then it'll come down to preferences.
If I could just interrupt just for a minute there, Jamie. So just so I can understand, Alexander Liu ran as a Liberal, so he said Liberal, and he's done very well. You would think that in a Melbourne, Toorak, those areas, I'm assuming, is what makes up that East Ward in Stonington. And Jamie is very high profile. I believe she was mayor at one stage as well. Yeah,
she was mayor in the first year of this term. She was elected in 2012 as an 18-year-old, so she's done 2 terms now, and she's still very young. There's an interesting dynamic on Stonington Council, and it all seems to come down to whether you're in favour or against putting a netball pavilion on a lawn bowls green.
Yes.
And Jamie's one of what's regarded as the ruling group in Stonington, together with Matthew. And actually, in that ward, there's also another candidate called Jen Frodo, who's also doing quite well. So there's 3 of them doing very well. About 1,200, 1,300 votes behind Alex. So how that pans out will all depend on preferences. And to my mind, the most interesting ward is South Ward, where what's particularly interesting is that the Mayor, Steve Stephanopoulos, who's been mayor for the last 3 terms of council, is actually coming 4th on the primary vote. So you've got Melina Sir, who's well ahead on nearly 2,500 votes. And that's out of 13, almost 14,000 votes that have been counted. So Melina normally does a lot better than that. Then second, you've got Judy Hindle, who's also been around. Actually, third is Judy Hindle, who's been around for a long time on 1,600 votes. And the Greens candidate, Mike Scott's on 1,700. And then Steve is coming 4th on 1,300. And then there's a whole bunch of candidates in the low to mid hundreds and a couple in the very low hundreds. Including a very interesting councillor called Henry Buck, who was a councillor in Stonington, I think back in the very early 2000s or even late 1900s, who got in unopposed in the days of single councillor awards, I think. And then he managed to get a term on Glen Eira Council on a countback. So he's twice been a councillor, yet never been elected. And he's running Glen Eira a couple of times since then and hasn't fared terribly well, and he's gone back to running in Stonington where he actually lives, and he's on 140 votes out of 13,000. So I think it's safe to say that Henry won't be elected again.
So he must have a record of some sort, served in 2 councils, never won an election. Maybe if he doesn't get elected, we can build a statue or something along those lines. On 140 votes out of nearly 14,000, I don't like his chance. Yeah, okay. If he does get elected, that's even better in terms of the record. Now, if I can maybe just ask you about Steve Stephanopoulos, who was the mayor up until last week in Stonington. Now, just looking at 2016 results, he got 9.3% thereabouts on the primary vote. Compare that to Sir, who was on 37%, so a quarter and a half almost.
Yeah.
Are you saying that Stephanopoulos has gone down, or he's hovering on about the same as last time, or you're not sure yet?
Well, his primary vote's about 10%, just a bit below 10%.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that'd be about the same. He's and he was on council before that as well. So this isn't his first term of council.
I believe he was re-elected in 2016. He had been defeated in 2012, I think.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
So what about Melina Sir? Do you have any understanding of where she's preferenced Stephanopoulos with her surplus if she does?
Well, she won't get it. She won't get a surplus this time because she's on 2,484 votes out of 13,000.
Right. Okay.
Yes. So I suspect her surplus helped him last time because they are quite close.
Right. Okay.
But she'll be needing to grab preferences to get herself over the line this time, which is also a surprising result because she has a history of absolutely dominating her elections.
Well, obviously, when you get 37%, that's astronomical last time. So I'd be eager to do some follow-up after tonight in terms of the background, in terms of what were the issues that dominated this year's campaign. Was it that netball stadium development that we discussed, or was it something else? And maybe we can, if we do this again, maybe we can have Melina Sir and Steve Stephanopoulos join us as well.
Sure.
Okay, well, look, Jamie Hyams, you've done a great, sterling job there looking at those numbers. If I could maybe just go back to Phillip Healey and Lambros, if you're still on the call, where do you think turnout will end up? Because I've heard it a few times tonight that turnout is up, that is participation, people returning the ballots. Is that something that we can all agree on, or is there anything that that goes against that narrative?
Well, turnout should be up because the voting age has been increased, or seniors have to participate this time. I made the mistake of thinking it was going to be down because I was out letterboxing and seeing stuff. 1 in 4 letterboxes just wasn't being emptied for weeks, and I thought this doesn't bode well. But then I forgot about the increase of participation caused by the seniors coming in. Lambros, did you have a thought?
Yeah, no, I agree with that entirely. But also people are home a lot more, of course, in isolation. So they're a bit more connected to their local communities. And I think the pandemic has actually put local government on the map a little bit because it's shown how important it is. And I think people are taking a much more of an interest in their local council. It may be the case that people are not used to checking their letterboxes. And I know in my ward, the VEC has been inundated with many votes to be reissued. People have lost them, misplaced them. The snails have eaten them, whatever the case may be. But people have certainly made the effort to vote. Of course, it's difficult from the Moreland perspective to compare it because we had an attendance election last time. And election day in 2016 was an awful day. It rained, it hailed, it was very windy. And that certainly kept people away, but it kept a particular demographic away. Certainly young, mobile voters turned out, and the older Victorians didn't. So it's changed this time round, and that might have an impact on the result. And of course, non-resident ratepayers is a big difference between a postal ballot and an attendance ballot. So everyone gets a ballot in a postal ballot, but in an attendance ballot, you have to show up or you have to apply for a postal vote. So we will find that the numbers in Moreland are significantly higher, and it's because more non-resident ratepayers are actually casting a ballot as opposed to turning up in an attendance ballot.
There is another factor as well, of course, is that the population has increased a lot, certainly in Glen Eira over the last 4 years. And not only has the population increased, but we were going gangbusters with citizenship ceremonies as well. So a lot more new citizens that get the vote as well as the population increasing. So that paid. And I remember that election day last year. I think it was the coldest October day in about 100 years. Certainly felt like it out helping one of my mates on the polling booth.
I went to a polling booth in Moreland at that election. It was bitter, and the weather was pretty awful too. But you know, for us, last time we were postal. We've always been postal. This time we're postal, and the participation is up. More votes back. Quite a call at the moment about people getting their votes arriving last Monday, and quite a trend. But, you know, you're probably talking about maybe 100 and something votes per ward for us. So that's 1,100 votes across the city. It's probably within the tolerance of and margin of error that they have for these sorts of things. But certainly the participation was well up.
Certainly, the B votes in Moreland are significant. So these are votes that were received in the last week. So you must make the assumption that they were posted on Thursday or Friday, and it represents about 25 to 30% of the total vote, which is a significant number of votes. So people have voted late. They've probably needed to have their postal ballot reissued, and I think that that's having a real impact as well.
I think sorry.
Thanks. An interesting thing I noticed, I don't know if you guys noticed it, but I've been looking at the progress results and the progress percentages. And as the election's gone on, the Greens have got more and more of the primary votes. So their percentage has gone up, and the votes that you'd expect perhaps more mature or older voters to vote for has gone down. So I don't know if that's a result of younger people just procrastinating more. That's my working theory anyway.
I think Lambros made a statement before, something like the Greens tend to vote later was the way I interpret it.
Yeah.
And we certainly saw that last election. We saw it this election, but to the tune of no more than 1% of the vote in each ward.
It's substantial in Moreland, and I would go as far as to say that we have a lot of apartments and we have a very large transient community. So people rent, they're here today, they're not tomorrow. So incumbency is not a factor for them. They vote on brand, and that brand for a young mobile community tends to be the Greens in the inner city. So what you're seeing is late votes across the inner city come in quite heavily today for the Greens. At least that's what we can assume from the samples that scrutineers are telling us. And I think it's probably people who live in apartments who had gone back home probably because of COVID isolation, came back a few days before the close of voting and voted late. Others who may have moved rang up the VEC, got a ballot reissued and voted late. So a huge late swing, I would call it, to the Greens.
Well, look, gentlemen, I've just had a quick look at the VEC website, and unfortunately, I don't see any results yet in metro councils. But I wanted to just show you this. This is one of the regional councils up in Buloke Shire Council, and this was updated 6:45, and we can see that there are some results trickling through. So I'll keep an eye on this. We're going to be finishing up in the next few minutes anyway. But what I wanted to let you know is that there are some people here that are getting elected unopposed, which I just think is a great problem to have. And so I think that's always the case. It's more so at regional councils, where there are less votes and there are less, smaller wards, smaller councils, etc. But yeah,
I think Knox had one.
Right, where was that? Well, do you know who that was, or which ward, or?
I think it was whatever covers the greater part of Wanturna.
Okay, yeah.
So, and you know, for Boroondara for the last 3, not this time, but the previous 3, we usually have one uncontested ward.
Yeah, so
but
I've just had a
not
look
so this time.
Collier Ward.
Collier Ward, yeah.
Yeah, Marcia, Timmers, Leach.
Well, if you look at Northern Grampians, I think Northern Grampians is undivided, and they had 8 positions. They had 7 councillors running for 8 positions.
Wow.
So 8 councillors running for 8 candidates running for 7 positions. Northern Grampians.
Yeah. Look, Theo, it's always been the case that there will be some that are unopposed. But it goes to show that we need to do more work to build capacity in these communities, promote the role of local government, and attract greater participation. Look, it's great for the individual candidates, and I also see it's great for the individual candidates, and there may even be some wards that didn't receive any nominations. So I'm not sure if that's
just to cut.
Yeah, there's one there.
Southwest Ward, nobody nominated.
But from a democratic perspective, it really is not what we want to see. We want to see the community have more options, and we want to make sure that there is contests right across the state. So I think that the sector has a lot of work to do to encourage more participation in local governments, to run more training and forums out there in regional Victoria. And that's something that I'll be taking back to the VLGA and the MAV, because I think next time we would love to see even more candidates put their hands up and not have any unopposed elections.
Yeah, well, I think running an election during a pandemic probably didn't help encourage people to run when they had a lot of other things on their minds.
I think it brought out more than normal. But
you would think so, but the outcome is that we've got more nominations.
Well, another thing on gender diversity, Boroondara was, I think, the most equally balanced council in Victoria with 5-5, and the prediction is that we'll have 6 females and 5 males, which I think the VLGA will probably be very excited about. But when you get 11 councillors, it's very hard to get true gender equality. But there you go.
Look, gentlemen, we could probably talk for hours about all sorts of trends or things that we can see on the ground and in the results, and what we may want to see in the future with the way that elections are run post 2020. But as we've been going on tonight, I've had a look, and most of the results in Metro Melbourne are not on the VSC's website, which goes against what we were advised by the VSC prior to today. And even when I asked them at 4 o'clock, they said that the results will be up there by 7, but obviously that hasn't happened. So I apologise for that. I apologise to our people that may be watching that wanted to go through some more results, but well done to our panel for getting us some scrutineer results and other samples. I really am grateful for that. And obviously later this week we will definitely have more results that will be coming through. So I don't know whether we want to do this again or not at some point next week or so, but you know, I think it's great that there's been people that have your experience that have been able to give us your insight tonight. So thank you. Was there anything that either one of you wanted to raise before we wrap up?
I'd be happy to come back this time next week because I actually think we will have a stack of results and no doubt some analysis that we can offer, and maybe I can catch up with these two guys on the analysis that they provided more broadly. But look, it's a good coverage, and just a pity that the cruelty being put upon our candidates, which I think is immense to operate an election under these conditions. They're waiting 2 weeks for their results, which I think is just really, really ruffles 2 of you that are waiting for results. And I think you look at the election Saturday night, you can get a result for a whole state in 4 or 5 hours. Surely it shouldn't take 2.5 to 3 weeks, or even up till November the 13th, which is when the current declaration has to be made by. I just think that's the wrong sort of system that takes that long.
So can I just clarify, or rather get some clarification from others? Is the reason why we don't have results declared because they have to wait for the button to be pressed? You can't say have a progress preferential count. You have to wait till every single first preference is counted, then you can press the button. Is that what the situation is in multi-member wards?
Theo, yeah, that is correct. And it's not even about pressing the button. The VEC is releasing primary results, first preference votes. However, they are only going to do that, is my understanding, is they're only going to do that after they've inputted all of the votes. So today is the first day, or maybe over the weekend they may have done some of the B votes. So these ones came in as late as midday on Friday. So the opportunity to open them up, extract them from the envelopes and data input them into the system just hasn't been there. They've been doing that today. They'll probably continue tomorrow, Wednesday. And I think we would start seeing the total primary results being released from tomorrow afternoon, and even some provisional declarations from Wednesday. So hopefully they'll be pushing those buttons in some of those councils on Wednesday afternoon.
Well, in Glen Eira, they did the first lot of inputting the A votes. They did that on Thursday, and they gave the scrutineers progress reports of the primary votes as they went. They stick it up on the window, and then for some reason, they stop when they've got about 75% of the vote, and then they email the candidates the rest of it the following day. On Saturday, they did the rest of the extractions for B, and then they inputted all those today. And again, they gave progress reports, and at the end of the day, they've sent all the candidates the final votes. So they've reconciled and they've sent the votes. And first thing on Wednesday morning, they're pressing the button. So I actually don't see why they had to make the candidates wait. I mean, tomorrow's Cup Day, obviously, but I don't understand why they had to make the candidates wait a day and a half before they can get the results when they've inputted all the ballots.
And there's probably, and really they should consider putting those results, if all the ballots have been now inputted and you have primaries, there's no harm in putting the primary results up on the internet, right? So people can see it. Yeah. Of course, it's not a result, it's not a provisional declaration or a final declaration, but certainly the community does deserve, and the candidates and their families and friends do deserve results.
Especially when they say on the website the results will be on this date and they're not on there on that date.
That's right. Well, they have sent the final primary counts to the candidates in Glen Eira. They've emailed that to them this afternoon.
But part of this is also the changes to the Act. We have all run in elections. So 8 years ago, we all got our results within either on the day or on the Sunday, or if it was really bad, it went till the Monday, okay? And that was 8 years ago. Changes to the Act, and then they allowed the extra week for postal ballots to dribble in. And it then was, you had this Group A, Group B count for the first time last time. This time it's even longer, and it's not really about COVID. It is about COVID in terms of how they handle the votes on the ground, but they just seem to be taking longer about what they are doing, including shipping boxes of votes off to centralised counting or data key punch places. Like Stonington's vote goes off to the showgrounds, and I think, or it goes out to Springvale, and Port Phillip's votes are going off to the showgrounds for key punch entry. So this isn't really about multi-member or single-member ward. The delays have been built in, and the delays for running this election are extensive, something that has to be looked into, because I think it brings on a lot of anxiety for candidates, and it's just not good for their mental health.
Although I know they've, like the Glen Eira and Monash, and I think even Frankston votes went to Sandown Racecourse to be counted, whereas in previous years they did in the computer lab at Caulfield, Monash University's Caulfield campus. And I am wondering if that's because within that campus there wasn't enough room for people to be 1.5 metres away from each other and scrutineering and so on. And they were quite strict on the 1.5 metre thing, so they actually needed a big open space so they could set it up in there, like the function rooms at Sandown Racecourse.
But you can now only have one scrutineer anyhow, can't you, per candidate?
Yeah, well, two for the keying in, one for the extraction.
Yeah,
and
in Glen Eira.
If you've still got 14 like I do, that's potentially 28 scrutineers plus staff. It does get crowded. I can understand that. Well, look, gents, we're almost at time, so I don't want to hold all of you the night before a public holiday. You've all got families and other things to get to, so I really do appreciate your time. Jamie, Hyams, Phillip, Healey, and Lambros, Tapinos. Lambros, all the best with your counting over the next few days. Before I finish, I might just give a 30-second status on Monash, where I am, because Jamie just mentioned it, but we haven't actually spoken about results. So from what I can see, that there are three sort of definite results so far, and that's Glen Waverley, Mulgrave, and in Oakley in my position. And then there's 8 that, in my view, you could make sort of a prediction and it'd probably be correct, but I wouldn't be certain. And we're talking mostly incumbents that are sort of hovering beneath 20% of the primary vote. sort of between 15 and 20. But I don't think I could say that it's certain that they will get elected, because when you've got 14 candidates, and a number of them preference each other, as we know, anything can happen. So that's all I have at this point from the first preference votes that we've seen emailed to candidates by the VEC, so official results. And maybe if we do this again next week, we'll have proper declared results. So thank you, all of you, again. I really do
Thank you,
appreciate
Theo.
it. I think we've tried something different, and we had John Masanauskas earlier from the Herald Sun. I don't believe there's any other media outlets that are doing anything like this. So I think it'd be good for the sector, and this will be distributed on not only social media, but maybe distributed by our networks after tonight as well. So thank you all, and
Thank
have
you.
a great Melbourne Cup Day and a great evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Lambros. Thank you, Jamie.